Good morning. It's May 15th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with President Yoon Suk-yeol's itinerary at Hiroshima later this week. The South Korean leader will attend the G7 summit starting Friday. He will also sit down with Biden and Yoshida for trilateral talks to discuss common interests and concerns, namely North Korea issues. A tight vote count is underway in Türkiye to elect the country's new leader. That is between President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his biggest challenger Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. If neither can get the 50% of votes needed to win, the two will go to a runoff. And today, the South Korean government and the ruling People Power Party will decide on a hike in electricity and gas rates for the second quarter. A raise by 8 won per kilowatt hour is believed to be on the way. After marking his first year in office last Wednesday, President Yoon Suk-yeol heads into a full week of summits. The G7 meeting and trilateral talks with Japan and the U.S. are key engagements on his calendar. Our Oh Soo-young starts us off this morning.
President Yoon Suk-yeol will hold a trilateral meeting with his Japanese and U.S. counterparts this weekend on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Hiroshima. Yoon's office has confirmed that the president will head to Hiroshima on Friday and attend an expanded session of G7 member countries, plus 8 guest nations, including South Korea. He will share South Korea's position on the key topics of food security, energy supplies amid the Ukraine war, climate change, and ways to bridge the gap between the G7 and the global South. Invited by Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, Yoon's attendance marks a further step to improve bilateral ties, as the two neighbouring countries aim to end their trade and diplomatic disputes that worsened in 2019. During Yoon's 3-day visit, the two leaders will make an unprecedented joint visit to a memorial honouring Korean victims of the atomic bomb that devastated Hiroshima in 1945. To boost joint efforts with the US to address North Korea's nuclear threat and cooperate on strategic areas, Yoon and Kishida will also meet with Joe Biden. While there won't be a joint declaration, the three-way summit will be a meaningful follow-up to their previous dialogue in Cambodia last November, according to Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Tae-ho.
Building on President Yoon's U.S. state visit to mark the 70th year of the South Korea-U.S. alliance and the resumption of shuttle diplomacy between Korea and Japan, we will further map out our role and contribution in multilateral diplomacy, such as at the G7 in Hiroshima.
Kim says Yoon is likely to hold bilateral meetings with other world leaders while he's in Hiroshima as part of his week-long streak of diplomacy that begins before he heads to the G7 meeting. This Wednesday, President Yoon will hold a bilateral meeting in Seoul with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau upon the 60th anniversary of South Korea-Canada relations. The summit will be followed by a joint press conference and an official banquet. Another key bilateral is scheduled for Sunday. As soon as Yoon returns from Hiroshima, he will meet with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who also heads to Seoul after the G7 meeting. The next day, Yoon will sit down with European Council President Charles Michel and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to discuss how to further their 60 years of bilateral relations, focusing on digital partnership and the green transition. As Yoon begins his second year in office, Kim Tae-ho said Seoul's foreign policy will focus on maximizing South Korea's economic and security interests and pursue pragmatic diplomacy, while strengthening global solidarity on the principle of freedom. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, over in Türkiye, it's a little after 3 a.m. on Monday, and the country is waiting on presidential and parliamentary election results. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his main opposition candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu are in fierce competition. For more updates, we have our Lee Si-hoo on the line with us. Si-hoo, how are the results of the election looking at the moment?
It's a fierce fight indeed, Tommy. It doesn't seem like either of the two candidates will secure the 50% of votes required to win the election. According to preliminary election results by the state-run Anadolu news agency, based on 95% of the votes counted, Erdogan had 49.52% of votes compared to 44.76% for rival candidate Kılıçdaroğlu. The third candidate, Sinan Ogan, received 5.28% of votes. If neither candidate can secure more than half of the votes, there will be a runoff between the top two contenders 2 weeks from now on, May 28th.
Now, the race poses the biggest challenge yet to Turkey's strongman leader Erdogan. Now, Shihu, please give us some background on Erdogan.
Yes, Tommy, this is the first time that Turkey's factious opposition has coalesced around a single candidate to face off against Erdogan. Kılıçdaroğlu, an economist and a politician, represents an election coalition of 6 opposition parties. Erdogan is the 12th and current president of Turkey since 2014, and prior to that, he served as prime minister from 2003 to 2014. Now, these elections come at a critical time, less than 3 months after a vicious earthquake in early February killed more than 50,000 people in southern Turkey and northern Syria. Erdogan has been criticized for botched rescue efforts and lax building controls that his ruling Justice and Development Party presided over for 2 decades. This also comes amid a serious economic crisis where over the last 2 years, the country's currency has plummeted and prices have ballooned. It's expected that if elected, Erdogan will continue to refrain from imposing sanctions on Russia and maintain a friendly relationship with the country. On the other hand, Kılıçdaroğlu is expected to work on restoring relationships with NATO and the European Union and focus efforts on recovering the economy. That's all I have for now, and I'll be back with more updates in a later newscast. Back to you, Dami.
All right, thank you, Shihu, for the update. Now, moving on, Ukraine says it has captured 10 enemy positions in the key eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. But Russia claims it had defended all attacks from Ukraine, denying its defenses had been breached. Our Eason does more.
Ukraine says it has made significant advances in the eastern city of Bakhmut, with Kyiv's defense minister claiming that its troops had captured about 10 enemy positions in northern and southern regions of the city. Ukraine has also claimed that it had advanced some 2 kilometers in the past week, signaling a huge momentum shift in Bakhmut. However, the Kremlin denies this, saying that while Ukraine did attempt large-scale attacks from the south and north of Bakhmut over the past 24 hours, Russian forces were able to defend their territory. The Russian Defense Ministry also stressed that Russian troops changed their position for strategic reasons, a move it claims is being falsely reported as fleeing and not regrouping. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky made a surprise visit to Paris on Sunday to hold talks with French President Emmanuel Macron. His visit to the French capital was an extension of his multi-stop European tour to request fresh pledges of military support as Kyiv continues to prepare for its counteroffensives against the Russian forces. The French presidential office noted that the 2 leaders discussed Ukraine's military and humanitarian needs and the more long-term perspectives for a return to peace in Europe. It added that Macron will reaffirm France and Europe's unwavering support of Kyiv. Zelensky's trip to Paris came after he paid a visit to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz earlier Sunday, where the 2 leaders discussed Ukraine's planned counteroffensives against Russia. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea lifted the mandatory 7-day self-quarantine last week, removing the one last virus measure and officially acknowledging that COVID-19 has become endemic. But have we really gotten over the pandemic? For more, let's turn to Professor Howard Lee from Seoul National University. Good morning, Professor Lee.
Thank you for having me back.
Thanks for joining us. Is it correct to say that COVID-19 is endemic? I mean, can we really say the pandemic is over?
Yes, the recent decision by the Korean government that we have entered into an endemic was motivated mainly by the WHO's declaration that the global emergency status for COVID-19 has been brought to an end. In fact, the pandemic has been on downward trend for more than a year. Not only that, population immunity has increased from both vaccination and infection. At the same time, COVID-19 mortality rates have been well controlled at lower than 0.1% in South Korea. And this resulted in the ease of overpressure on healthcare systems. With all those observations and findings, I think it is okay to say that South Korea is certainly transitioning from pandemic to endemic for COVID-19. However, this is not to say that the pandemic is over. The virus is still here, and we have to live with it. That's what an endemic is all about.
Right. Now, the thing is, there are still many people who feel kind of hesitant to take off masks in public places, including myself. Then how long do you think it will take for the world to feel completely safe from the virus, or are we there yet?
Well, that's $1 million question. Nobody knows how long it will take before we can go back to the pre-pandemic normal. We may not return to life as we knew it before COVID-19 because the pandemic has changed so many aspects of our lives. The virus also has left a deep scar on our attitude to infectious diseases, which needs quite a time to heal. Let me give you an example. As you said, although the indoor face mask mandate has been removed several months ago, people are still wearing masks because many still don't feel safe enough to get rid of the mask. Additionally, many COVID-19 patients are still suffering from long COVID symptoms affecting almost every single organ and system in the body. Therefore, I'd like to say that it will take long for the world to feel safe again from the coronavirus, yet I don't know how long it will be.
Right. We'll have to keep watching how the virus develops or goes away completely. Now, the virus level has been lowered, the alert level has been lowered. Does that mean the number of new virus cases will not go up?
As you said, the crisis level for COVID-19 nationwide has been changed from serious to alert in South Korea. That means almost all bans will be lifted in South Korea sooner or later, including mandatory isolation for 7 days. However, this does not necessarily mean that the number of new COVID-19 cases will not go up again as you asked. For example, you may recall the daily tallies last week went up over 20,000 just before the government lowered the national crisis level. Of course, this was mainly due to day-to-day fluctuation, so we don't need to worry too much about it. That said, what this tells us is that the daily new virus cases can go up anytime, particularly when a new subvariant emerges. However, we are not what we used to be 3 years ago. In other words, we now have many tools to fight against the virus. So even if the case would have gone up, no need to panic.
That's good to hear. Now,
Sure.
We've come a long way, more than 3 years, right? Then what tasks or challenges are we now left with after all that 3 years of the pandemic, Professor?
First and foremost, we have to look back what we did right, what we did wrong, and what we do differently if we could do it again. In the first phase of the pandemic, South Korea performed quarantine and other preventive measures relatively well. However, in the middle of the pandemic, the glory in the previous stage was overshadowed and discolored by political agenda and unscientific myths, some promoted even by the government, implicitly and explicitly. Late and bumpy introduction of vaccines is one example. We also have to continue investing to develop vaccines and therapeutics against emerging infections, most of which we do not know what they are and when they become apparent and threatening us. Therefore, this has to be approached from the perspective of public preparedness for whatever is uncertain but clear to come back again. In other words, we have to set the country ready for any upcoming pandemic by continuous investing in the healthcare system and healthcare manpower. When it comes to COVID-19 again, we have to get vaccinated every year probably because we live in an endemic. particularly those who are vulnerable to serious diseases.
Right. It's always good to be prepared, whether it's against the virus or anything in any occasion, right?
Sure, absolutely.
All
We have
right.
to.
Professor Lee, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you again.
A magnitude of 4.5 earthquake hit South Korea's east coast near Donghae city this morning. The Korea Meteorological Administration at 6:27 a.m. on Monday detected the quake some 59 kilometers northeast of Donghae city in Gangwon-do province. This is the biggest earthquake to hit the Korean peninsula or surrounding coastal area this year. According to the local fire station, as of 7 a.m., 18 reports of tremors were registered from Donghae City and the surrounding cities of Samcheok and Gangneung. Since April 23rd, the region has seen a cluster of minor earthquakes and tremors, a phenomenon known as an earthquake swarm. The government and the ruling People Power Party held a consultative meeting on Monday to decide on the gas and electricity rates for the second quarter of this year. While the government will announce the rate hike later in the day, the ruling party announced a set of financial assistance packages will be provided for vulnerable people to cushion the burden. The government is likely to raise the electricity rates by 8 won per kilowatt hour, which is higher than the expected 7 won increase. The increase also comes as the government raised electricity rates for the first quarter by more than 13 won, the sharpest hike in about 4 decades, and a bit to help state-run KEPCO narrow its losses. Meanwhile, the two sides are also expected to raise gas rates 1 to 2 won per megajoule. South Korea's Hadong-gun County brews Korean tea for the world, including the green tea for the Starbucks headquarters in the U.S. The home to green tea is hosting 2023 World Tea Expo Hadong. Our Choi Soo-hyung has the story.
The aroma of fresh tea washes over visitors at the 2023 World Tea Expo Hadong. The expo is running until June 3rd at Hadong World Tea Museum in Hadong-gun County in Gyeongsang-namdo Province. This year's Tea Expo, which was postponed for last year due to COVID-19, is organized around several experience zones. Visitors can taste a variety of teas at the spacious plaza in front of the World Tea Museum. Hadong tea is especially famous for ujeon, the highest grade tea made from the youngest leaves harvested in early April. It's a great opportunity to wash away your tiredness with a smooth and fragrant cup of tea. The Global Tea Experience Zone is also not to be missed. Visitors can enjoy the tea etiquette of various countries, including Korea's traditional tea ceremony.
As well as experiencing this Korean tea culture, visitors to the expo also have the chance to compare it to tea culture from Japan, China, Türkiye and England.
Visitors can compare differences among East Asia's tea cultures, such as how in Japan, green tea leaves are ground up as matcha powder and make soft bubbles that are easy to drink.
I came to the Tea Expo because I have always been interested in tea culture. It's a chance for me to experience various countries' tea culture so I can broaden my knowledge.
In Türkiye, they produce the tea from the same type of tea tree as in Hadong, but the way it is cultivated is different because they usually remove the tea leaves with scissors, not their hands. And they drink tea with lemon and lumps of sugar. You can also directly experience how Hadong tea is produced. The traditional method, which has been passed down for over 1,000 years, involves hand-mixing tea leaves from a heated large pot.
I tried this tea-making experience last year and this year, but unlike last year, it was new this time, so it was fun, but a little scary because it was hot. Anyways, I still enjoyed it.
Hadong World Tea Expo is hoping to welcome more visitors from all over the world. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News, Hadong.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin with the deadly tropical cyclone Mocha, which hit the coastlines of Myanmar and Bangladesh over the weekend. Myanmar's west coast was the worst hit. The Category 5 cyclone hit the Bay of Bengal on Sunday, leaving 5 people dead in Myanmar. Cyclone Mocha brought with it wind speeds of up to 200 kilometers per hour. It took out power lines, brought down a communications tower, and blew off roofs. It has also caused landslides and floods. Authorities in both countries managed to evacuate about 400,000 people from at-risk low-lying areas before the storm arrived. The storm also destroyed over 1,300 bamboo shelters in the city of Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, the site of the world's largest refugee camp. This comes 2 months after a fire there left 12,000 Rohingya refugees without shelter. The storm is set to reduce in strength over northern Myanmar from Monday night. Now turning our attention to Thailand, the general elections there on Sunday saw opposition parties surge ahead in the polls. Results show the Move Forward and Pro-Thai parties are well ahead of the incumbent Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha's United Thai Nation Party. The retired army general came to power in a military coup in 2014. Up for grabs in this election were 500 seats in Thailand's lower house of parliament. And with most of the votes counted, Move Forward is leading, followed by Pro-Thai. Although parties are expected to discuss a coalition, a majority coalition might still not be enough to govern. This is because the next government and prime minister is chosen by a 250-seat Senate, all of whom were appointed by military coup leaders. Now, Sweden's Loreen has been crowned the winner of Eurovision 2023. The 39-year-old beat out competition from 25 other countries with her song Tattoo in the final of the contest in Liverpool on Saturday. It was Loreen's second time winning the contest, having first taken the title in 2012 with the song Euphoria. She is only the second person to have won Eurovision twice and becomes the first woman to do so. The win means that Sweden will host next year's Eurovision. Second place was taken by Finland's Karja with Cha Cha Cha, followed by Noah Kirel from Israel with Unicorn. The 67th edition of the competition was moved to the UK from Ukraine due to the ongoing conflict there. And finally, a man from Florida has broken the record for the longest time spent living underwater without depressurization. Joseph Dituri, who also goes by Dr. Deep Sea, set the new best of 74 days on Sunday in an undersea lodge located 9 meters below the surface in Key Largo in Florida. The lodge does not use technology to adjust for increased underwater pressure, unlike a submarine. Dituri's accomplishment beats the previous record of 73 days, 2 hours and 34 minutes set in 2014 at the same location. But Dr. Deep Sea is not done yet. He plans to stay until June 9th, which will see him reach 100 days as part of a research project dubbed Project Neptune 100.
I'll just take a quick nap.
Good morning. As soon as we get into mid-May, it begins feeling more like summer. Today is Teachers' Day in Korea, and temperatures in the early morning hours are in the low teens. Then heat is on the way, with highs soaring close to 30 degrees Celsius in most parts this afternoon. We also need to be cautious in the sun during the day. Full sunshine nationwide will boost UV rays to high to very high levels after lunch. Ozone levels will be high as well. Let's try to walk, bike, carpool, or use public transportation to reduce ozone levels. Meanwhile, air quality is bad this morning in Busan and all day in Ulsan. T-shirt and shorts weather this afternoon with highs easily surpassing 25 this afternoon, going a couple of degrees higher than Sunday. Now, summer-like heat is sticking around through tomorrow with an expected high of 30 degrees Celsius here in Seoul. Now, that's Korea for you. Here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching.